Hey, I'm Billy Hollowell. Welcome to Pure Talk, a show brought to you by pureflix.com. I am joined today by a pastor, an author, and a minister named Bruce Porter. How you doing today, Bruce?
Good, Billy. Thank you for having me on.
Thanks for coming on. You and I have talked many times before in the past about your really, I think, fascinating history of coming alongside people after tragedy. And one of the things, as we reflect on the anniversary of 9/11, that about your story I find incredibly interesting is that and you're from Colorado. So you, after
Right.
9/11, went all the way to New York, days after 9/11 happened,
Mhm.
to be a chaplain and to minister to people. So just to kind of start here, what was it that drove you to make that decision?
Well, what drove me was a sense of duty. For some years before 9/11 took place, I joined our local volunteer fire department, not only to be a firefighter and to serve the community medically, but also as a critical incident stress debriefer. It's a kind of a branch of counseling that fell right in with my pastoral duties as chaplain of the department too, to help people who go through difficult situations in responses, especially first responders, and help them to process their own psychological and emotional grief in circumstances that they find themselves in. So when 9/11 took place, of course, we all remember where we were and what we were doing and, the circumstances of our day. And I just sensed immediately that God was calling me with a sense of duty to respond to that because I knew I had some skill sets that might be useful in New York. They lost 343 firefighters that day. And so it was obviously an off the scale traumatic experience for those people.
And I mean, it's an amazing move to go all the way across the country and to do that. But you obviously, like you said, you felt a duty and a calling to do that. I want to get into the finer points of what you saw on the ground while you were there. But a lot has been said in recent years about the nation's move away from God. I feel like this is constantly a point of discussion in the secular world and in the faith world as well. What did you see? Going back, to that the few days after 9/11, what did you see on the ground there, spiritually speaking, in terms of those you interacted with?
Well, I arrived on scene 6 days after the collapse of the towers. My chief gave me his blessing. I went back with all my gear. I arrived on the pile 7 days. That the next morning, actually, I was on the pile. And what I saw, of course, was off scale terrible. The rubble itself was, just overwhelming. You had just an incredible pile of just trash, literally. We couldn't even find the face of a telephone intact in all that rubble. And of course, knowing that over 3,000 people had lost their lives, we were literally walking around in an open graveyard there, and the smell was overwhelming. And it became quickly apparent that on scene there, as I interfaced with the New York City Fire Department and search and rescue workers from other parts of the country, that our work there was not one of rescue, but one of recovery. And it became a mission of really recovering what remains we could find so that we could get them into the quickly set up morgues nearby for processing by the morticians there and the medical examiners to help families get closure at the end. And so it was really a mission of mercy. But I found myself, really working, of course, more with the first responders, the police, the firefighters, and other rescue workers, in counseling them and doing diffusings right on the pile or in the morgue and doing what I could to help them to process what they were dealing with. Obviously, it was over the top for everybody, and the emotions were just overwhelming for people. So I think my mission was really one of just giving aid, comfort, and mercy and encouragement to people as I encountered them. And as you mentioned, I never saw a single person refuse to pray with me or to talk with me. I had chaplain emblazoned on my helmet. And so, it was obvious that I was there for them. And in the midst of all that, I think, we saw some good things happen. I mean, a lot of anger. I dealt with people who were very frustrated and asking the classic question, where was God when all this happened? And these were good people, why would God allow this? And so, it was a complex situation.
Well, and you think back to that time, there was a sense, I think, across the country of this cohesiveness. And it didn't last very long, but something that I don't remember in my life feeling sort of everywhere, that everybody was affected by something. It hurt them emotionally, physically, spiritually, and people felt that. Would you say that you would agree with that in terms of the people who were on site, that there was a real sense spiritually of a connectedness maybe that hadn't been experienced before?
Yeah, it was amazing, the upsurge in patriotic expression that I saw everywhere. Of course, as you might recall, I mean, people were flying the American flag from their cars and from their houses. And, there was just this tremendous uptick in a sense of urgency and outrage that I likened in my book that I just wrote to what happened right after Pearl Harbor. When America was attacked by the Imperial Japanese. There was this sense that people needed to rise to the occasion, and then we needed to realize that we were under attack and that there were people very seriously trying to hurt us. So it was, as you say, it was short-lived. I think if 9/11 was a wake-up call, unfortunately, a few years later, most people hit the snooze button because, we are basically a lot less vigilant, I think, certainly, and a lot less of a sense of urgency about the world that we live in right now. And a lot of that we can attribute maybe later, to what's going on in the media and culturally and so forth. But yeah, I mean, it was amazing to watch that.
Well, and it was around the same time that the media really sort of exploded in terms of access and, Hollywood. You kind of go through, you look at technology, and that's a whole other discussion, but it's a fascinating one about what sort of changed us culturally in this country. How long were you there in New York after 9/11?
I was actually on the pile for 2 weeks. That was about my maximum limit. I couldn't take much more. I had to get out of Dodge. And I came back to my local community, and 2 weeks later, my chief in the department asked me if I would hand carry back a large donation approaching $100,000 to be distributed to families of the firefighters and the widows and the husbands of people who had lost loved ones in the fire department. And so I was privileged to go back to New York for another 2 weeks to share those funds with people in their homes and in the fire stations and so forth, and actually meet with the children and the widows of some of the fallen firefighters. So altogether, I'd say about a month that I was actually there.
What for you, and maybe it's hard to pinpoint one single moment, but you've seen a lot. You were also very involved comforting families in the Columbine shooting in the wake of that. You obviously were very involved after 9/11.
Right.
With 9/11, what was the most moving moment for you personally at any point during that month, whether it was with the families or being on the pile, as you said?
Well, one outstanding event that happened that really changed my life, frankly. About 3 days after I arrived on scene, I was standing on the rubble pile, and I relate this in the audiobook that I just finished, that I was standing there in the rain one day, and we were watching as they were pulling rubble apart, with the cranes and so forth, and looking for human remains. I mean, it was grisly work. And my telephone rang, my cell phone. And I pulled my mask off and I reached in and grabbed my phone. And it was my 5-year-old daughter at the time who was calling me and saying, "Daddy, what are you doing?" And she was looking for me because they had that national live 24/7 feed that was going out to the whole country from the rubble pile there. And she said, "Daddy, what are you doing?" And I didn't know how to answer at first. I didn't want to hurt her in any way. And I just said, "Well, honey," I said, some really mean men made a big mess here in New York, and I'm just here trying to help clean it up." And I could hear her breathing into the phone, and it was kind of cute in a way. And she finally said, "Daddy, can I bring my little broom and help?" And it put me on the ground. I mean, it really, literally, I sank to my knees in the rubble because that's how I felt the whole time I was there. It was like all I had was a little broom, just whatever I had in training or experience seemed so inadequate in that situation. And it was a seminal moment for me because I realized that it's important, whoever we are, that we bring our little brooms to the disasters of this world, and we try to be a light for the gospel and for Christ, and to bring that love to people in the midst of their situation. And my little girl taught me a very powerful lesson there, that even a little broom can make a difference if you make it available.
I love that. I love that. What changed you the most about that experience of being there on the ground, interacting with people who had been so affected?
I think it reinforced in me the duty that every Christian bears to be responsive to the world around them, not just in that social justice sense that people get into today, but to be compassionate, to weep with those that weep, to rejoice with those that rejoice, and in all cases, to be an ambassador, to take the good news of Christ to the world. Out of that, and previously, Columbine, I've had the privilege of preaching in over 40 countries, and sometimes as many as 20 times. And we've gone out to other disaster scenes in different parts of the world, terrorism incidents, school shootings in Germany, for example, terrorism in Israel. And I've been there and made myself on scene and available. And, I think that event really cemented within me that the good news and the love of Christ travels with least resistance over the golden wire of compassion. And that if we can make those bridges and we can reach out to people in their moment of need and love them where they are, it makes a huge difference. And, so I'd say that it really had that kind of impact on me.
Now, you had told me a story, and I don't remember all the details of it, but it was moving when you told it to me, about a dream that you had had. I don't know if you want to share that story, just the different benchmarks of it, and sort of, because I think so many of us want signs and we want to understand where God wants us, and we struggle until those pieces are put together. So if you wouldn't mind sharing that, I would love to hear it.
Sure. 3 months before the Columbine shooting that we had out here in Littleton, where I live, I had a horrible dream one night. I woke up in a cold sweat, screaming. It was overwhelming. In the dream, I saw kids running in lines with their hands on top of their head, and I heard explosions, and I saw kids that were bleeding in this dream, vision, whatever you want to call it. And it was amazing because I couldn't put it together with anything I'd ever seen previously. It was off scale, the terror of it. I was standing in a library. I remember at one point, I know now to be a library. At the time, I was in a room where I saw kids sitting at tables, and a red light went on, and I heard bombs, explosions, gunshots. I wasn't sure. Kids began to get bloody. They were falling, screaming. And I kept hearing in the back of my mind, the words 911, 911, 911 over and over again, which I assumed immediately was just the emergency number that people dial when they're in trouble. But in any case, it didn't seem to fit that well with that situation. And 3 months later to the day, I had that on January 20th, 3 months later to the day, Columbine happened. And I saw unfolding right before my eyes the things that I had seen in that dream. And thankfully, my wife actually wrote it all down in her journal because she was awakened. She thought I was having a heart attack. She was writing down things as fast as I was saying them because I told her what I was seeing. This is unusual for me. But
I was just going to say, has this happened for you before? You know, a dream like that?
occasionally, you know, I make no claims to be a prophet, but, you know, once in a while, God does visit me that way in some very strange ways. And I see things sometimes before they happen, which is, you know, an act of the Holy Spirit. I mean, I take no claim for it or, you know, any credit for that. But I think in a way, God uses that in a lot of people's lives to prepare them for things that they're either called to do or they're about to experience or go through, to prepare their hearts.
So not to interrupt you, but the 911 you feel was connected to your experience after at 9/11?
Just a few years later, 2001, September, I was standing on the rubble pile with this other firefighter, and we were just looking over the scene and trying to figure out what we were going to do next there. And he looked over at me and he said, "Isn't it wild that this happened on 911, the emergency number?" And all of a sudden, like a lightning bolt went off in my head. And it was like, I just relived that dream. And I looked at the guy, couldn't even speak. And I just said, wow. And I got goosebumps on goosebumps because I realized that 911 was a foreshadowing of what I was seeing right in front of me there. And I knew that I was right where I was supposed to be, doing exactly what God wanted me to be doing. And it was a tremendous comfort and encouragement for me at the time.
Well, Bruce, thank you so much for joining us today. I could talk to you forever. There's so much. I mean, that's a phenomenal story. I think a lot of people out there can relate to that. Where can people find out more about you and the books that you've written?
Well, the best place to go to get, you know, I'll show you real quick if you would like to see. This is the newest book, Destroying the Shadow Agenda, and it's about 9/11, but it also is an anthology about America, and very much like your Dividing Line book that you did. It was tremendous. You know, people can reach that book by just going to destroyingtheshadowagenda.com. There's a information page there that they can read about it. And the blog site is brucespeaks.com. It's very simple. And there's some links on there.
Well, thank you so much, Bruce, and everybody else out there watching. Please tune in next week for the next Pure Talk. You can go to facebook.com/PureFlix. Have a good day.
Here's the deal. PureFlix.com has 6,500 titles you can watch right now. That's way too many to show you in just 90 seconds, but you know what? Here we go.
I'm the man, you were the dog. I am talking to a dog.
How many times do you know the directions to your house, but you listening to the phone?